This video is on hierarchy. You can think of hierarchy in graphic design as a ranking of the visual weight from what is most important to least important. Or another way is to say, what do you want your audience to see first, second, third, and so on. So this over here is a good example of visual hierarchy because your eye sees this first and foremost, then this, due to the proximity of the first thing, and then we go up here and then down to here. And this one looks like it's got to be an example of bad hierarchy, and this is a perfect example of if you try to make everything important with different techniques, then nothing looks important and you have a design that is just horrifically busy. Everything that the designer probably thought they were doing here, it was going to be so interesting and so unique, but everything's just competing against each other, so nothing gets to be the clear number one, then number two, then number three. That hierarchy is one of the most important principles of graphic design. It often makes it really easy to separate an experienced successful designer from a rookie designer. It's one of the most common missing ingredients in student work. We humans enjoy hierarchy as a basic part of life. As cave people, we had to quickly assess our wants and our dangers. Like, I'm hungry, there's a lion approaching, the lion also looks hungry, there's a snake hanging from a tree 30 feet ahead, and my cave floor needs to be clean. So I rank these in hierarchy, just like the caveman would have to do. There's two things of danger there, one where they need to get food and one that's more of like a cleanup item. Got to take things in order, so we appreciate that. There's almost a derogatory way that I like to explain hierarchy, and that is, and I don't really mean this like in a literal sense, but it's just a way to make people remember it, I think, is treat your audience like they're stupid, and that you have to make it very, very clear to them what you want to see first, or what they should read or see first, what's second, third, and so on. But the funny thing is that when you do that, something magic happens to your design. It not only starts to look better, like you'll even have to admit yourself, wow, my design is much better after I just applied that simple principle of organizing what it was first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and putting the principles of hierarchy to work, making that happen. It looks better to you, your design colleagues. A creative director that's maybe looking to hire you will notice it in your portfolio and then hopefully hire you. So, and then just a reminder here, if you're assigned this video because you're doing the balance project, this video is to assist you with the balance project. However, it's a separate entity. So I'm going to be showing you examples. They're not part of what you should or shouldn't be doing for the balance part. You basically just pause, read the rest of this if you're doing balance, because the examples I show in Illustrator will be contrary to some of the things that you're required to do. Okay, so what are ways of achieving visual hierarchy in design? And if you just even Google that subject, you'll probably find like 5 different websites that have a list, and they all list the things a little bit different. Also, if you're reading in the textbook for the class or any textbook on graphic design, you'll see that there are a plethora of ways that people like to categorize these things. But it really doesn't matter how you categorize them as long as you understand some of the basics. And I think one kind of easy way to remember hierarchy is even think of it in terms of if you walked into a room with people, which people would you notice first? The first way most people think of achieving hierarchy is with size. So this composition looks unbalanced, it looks left heavy, so we would either need to make this bigger or replace it with something else big. But we soon learned that that's a pretty boring, plain way to design. It's basically using a form of symmetry or implied symmetry. The next, and also very powerful, is color. Brighter colors attract our eye, and if it's the only colored entity in the design, it's really going to attract our eye. If we look at a composition like this, it's pretty obvious that it feels left heavy. A pop of contrasting color to the rest of it puts a lot of visual weight here and gets you in the right direction towards balancing the composition. The next one is placements and alignments. If something is isolated, we tend to notice it. If everything on the grid or the composition is aligned with each other and one thing is out of alignment, our eye tends to go over there. And just a note on that, in our culture we read from left to right, so we tend to notice things at the top left first. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be the key hierarchical thing on the composition. Obviously, if there's something off to the right that is following these principles, then our eye is probably going to go there first. But it's just worth mentioning this thing. And also, in our culture, we tend to tolerate a bit more weight on the left of a composition than somebody would from another culture that it's not a left to right reading. Let's look at an example of isolation. So you can see we've got a lot of weight over here on the right, but just this one little thing that's isolated, our eye tends to go there. And now let's go back and talk about how these are the biggest three, how that would work if you opened up a door and inside were people. Think of who you might notice first. If there is a person in there that's 8 feet tall, your eye's probably going to go there. If everybody in the room is wearing white pants and a white t-shirt, and there's one person dressed all in purple, who do you think you're going to notice first? Similar thing with placement and alignment even. If everybody's in like a military format, and then there's one person in the military formation that's all slouched over, your eye's probably going to go there. If everybody in the room mostly is towards the left side of the room and they're all talking amongst each other and there's one person standing in isolation over on the right, your eye's probably going to go over there and say, I wonder why that person's all by themselves. We just can't help ourselves. There's certain things that we notice. Okay, so another thing that'll create a hierarchical pop would be implied lines. So when we're basically saying, look here, and even whether there's something actually there or not, it tends to have a lot of visual weight. Lines can be used in a composition to separate things, which is very handy as well. But whenever you're leading the viewer's eye towards something, that area is going to have some significance, aka some visual weight. White space has a very unique place in design in general, but also in the hierarchy aspect of design. Not only can it have its own visual weight, meaning that you can have a bunch of stuff over on the right, for example, and nothing on the left, and yet somehow it still magically balances out because that white space has its own presence to it. But also, if you put white space around an object, it makes it feel more important. It's sort of related to isolation, but it doesn't even have to totally feel isolated. It can just be like the one and only thing in a composition that has some white space and still give it that sense of importance. So here there's no question that our eye is going right there. That just bit of white space around there does it. Most of the forms of hierarchy are some form of contrast, especially size, color, because they're contrasting color or contrasting size to the things that are already there. So other forms of contrast would be what they call fracture, whereas like an item that you would normally expect to be intact, like especially a typographic letter, like just imagine a big letter A and then all of a sudden you start to chop it into little pieces. The only item in a composition with texture would be more likely to get your eye and have more hierarchy. Even just think about typography. A bold letter sticks out more. An italic letter sticks out a little bit more than regular type. So anything that you do, if it's the only thing that's leaning, it's going to get your attention. Now, be careful about a related topic here, and that is a tangent. A tangent is this like nearly impossible situation where something is just barely touching something else. And so a tangent could be worked to your benefit, and I'll try to show you an example. But a lot of times beginners will put a tangent right at the edge, and you just cannot help as a viewer to go right there. It's almost like this is vibrating like a blinking light, just drawing attention to that edge. In drawing the viewer's eye to the edge is mostly considered to be a bad thing, because what are you doing? You're making them leave your work. Same thing when an artist paints a picture. They're going to try to avoid putting a tangent right at the edge because it kills that fantasy of the image. It reminds you that it is a picture. So definitely in design, not only does it remind you that, oh, that's just a printed piece and here I go, but it takes the viewer's eye out of it and you're less likely to get the message across to the viewer. If this was an advertisement and there was some key thing here, like a phone number maybe, then maybe you could argue that the use of this tangent makes sense, because obviously this is probably the key focal point that your eye goes to, and then this would be the next, because it's at, again, an impossible tangent, creates a vibration where the two things come together. It would be another example of something that could lead the viewer's eye out of the composition. An implied line that, instead of pointing to something important, just points to the edge of the composition. And notice how this is totally different than a tangent, right? Here you have circles coming near the edge, but they're getting cut off. That's fine. That's interesting. Tangents near an edge is a visual distraction. Okay, so that concludes our discussion on the ways of achieving hierarchy in your designs.